I still love them and, remember them every day.
Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi were more than just comedy partners. They were like brothers. They became famous together on Saturday Night Live, and as the Blues Brothers, sharing a deep love for music and a bond that few people ever experience. When Belushi died suddenly at age 33 from a drug overdose, Aykroyd was completely heartbroken and carried a heavy guilt for years, especially because he missed a final phone call from his friend.
The worst?
The worst thing that's happened to you in your life, and what'd you learn from it?
Well, I suppose John's death.
Even now, Aykroyd remembers Belushi not for his wild behavior, but as a smart, warm, and incredibly gifted man. This is the story of their beautiful friendship, the tragic loss that tore it apart, and how Aykroyd continues to honor Belushi's memory every single day. The meeting that changed everything. The story of Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi begins not in the bright lights of Hollywood, but in the gritty, snow-covered streets of Toronto during the bitter winter of 1974. Aykroyd, a lanky, bespectacled Canadian with a voracious appetite for the esoteric, had joined the Toronto outpost of Second City in 1973, following in the footsteps of comedy legends like Mike Nichols, Elaine May, and Alan Arkin. He was already making a name for himself as a sharp, cerebral improviser with an uncanny ability to mimic anyone from Richard Nixon to a malfunctioning robot. Belushi, meanwhile, was a product of the Chicago Second City troupe, a whirlwind of chaotic energy, raw physical comedy, and an almost primal connection to the rhythms of rhythm and blues. He had come north to recruit talent for the National Lampoon Radio Hour, and what happened next was nothing short of destiny. The two men clicked instantly, almost magnetically. Aykroyd would later recall that from the very first meeting, they were already cooking up what would become the Blues Brothers, trading riffs on obscure soul records and mimicking the mannerisms of their musical heroes. There was an immediate recognition between them, a shared comedic sensibility, a deep, almost scholarly love of American roots music, and an understanding of each other's creative spirits that would form the foundation of one of the most legendary partnerships in entertainment history. They spoke a language that no one else seemed to understand, a dialect of absurdist humor and musical obsession that bonded them like brothers from another mother. Belushi was already something of a force of nature, a human tornado who could clear a room or fill it with laughter in equal measure. Larger than life, magnetic, and utterly unpredictable, he drew people into his orbit with an almost gravitational pull. He had a manic energy that could exhaust even the most seasoned performers, but there was also a vulnerability beneath the bravado, a sensitivity that made him deeply human. Aykroyd, by contrast, was the more grounded and structured of the two, the straight man to Belushi's chaos, the architect to his whirlwind. Where Belushi was instinctual and impulsive, Aykroyd was methodical and detail-oriented. Yet together, they were unstoppable. Their complementary personalities created a chemistry that would soon take the comedy world by storm, a fusion of intellect and id that produced some of the most transcendent comedic moments of the 20th century. When Lorne Michaels assembled the original cast of Saturday Night Live in 1975, both Aykroyd and Belushi were among the chosen few. It was there, on that hallowed ground of late-night television, that their partnership would truly flourish. The show was a chaotic experiment, a low-budget, high-stakes gamble that could have failed spectacularly. Instead, it became a cultural phenomenon, and Aykroyd and Belushi were at its white-hot center. Aykroyd later said of Belushi, "He was my brother. We spent 8 years together, and every day of it was a gift and a lesson." Those 8 years would produce some of the most memorable comedy ever captured on film and television, from the legendary Samurai Futaba sketches to the manic cheeseburger diner scenes. But beyond the laughter, there was a profound bond, a friendship that transcended the professional and entered the realm of the sacred. The birth of the Blues Brothers and the glory days. The Blues Brothers were not born in a boardroom or a writer's meeting. They emerged organically from the deep friendship and shared musical passion of two young comedians who loved the blues with an almost religious devotion. The characters of Jake and Elwood Blues began taking shape during SNL's first season, evolving over more than 2 years before they ever appeared on screen. Aykroyd, a walking encyclopedia of blues trivia, had long been fascinated by the mythic figures of the genre, men like Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and John Lee Hooker, who had transformed their pain and joy into transcendent art. Belushi, for his part, was drawn to the raw, unfiltered energy of the music, the way it could make you feel alive and broken at the same time. Together, they decided to pay homage to these legends by becoming them, donning black suits, skinny ties, and fedoras, and taking the stage as Jake and Elwood Blues. Their television debut came on April 22, 1978, when the Blues Brothers performed as the musical guest on Saturday Night Live. Backed by legendary musicians including Steve Cropper, Donald Duck Dunn, and Matt Guitar Murphy, Belushi as Joliet, Jake Blues, and Aykroyd as Elwood Blues delivered a performance that would go down in television history. The episode is still cited as one of the best-ever SNL episodes, a perfect storm of musical virtuosity, comedic timing, and sheer, unadulterated charisma. The studio audience, many of whom had never heard of the Blues Brothers before, was left stunned and breathless. It was a moment of pure alchemy, a fusion of comedy and music that had never been seen before and has rarely been equaled since. What made the Blues Brothers so special was the reverence with which they approached the music. Aykroyd and Belushi were not mocking the blues, they were celebrating it. They took advantage of their celebrity to focus attention on soul music, introducing a new generation to the artists who had inspired them. They studied the original recordings obsessively, learning every nuance, every inflection, every subtle shift in rhythm and melody. They were not content to simply imitate, they wanted to embody the spirit of the music, to channel the ghosts of the greats who had come before them. When Atlantic Records suggested they could simply buy the rights to the cover songs they were performing for a mere $10,000 each, the duo refused. They insisted that the original songwriters keep their full publishing royalties. As Aykroyd explained, "We loved and respected them, and we weren't going to do wrong by them. Eddie Floyd gets his money, Donnie Walsh gets his money, all the people who wrote the songs in the show, all of them got their full publishing because we loved and respected them, and we weren't going to do wrong by them." It was a principle that reflected not just their integrity, but their deep, abiding love for the music and its creators. The Blues Brothers phenomenon quickly outgrew the confines of SNL. Their debut album, Briefcase Full of Blues, went double platinum, selling over 2.8 million copies and spawning hits like Soul Man and Rubber Biscuit. The 1980 film The Blues Brothers followed, a wild, chaotic, and utterly original movie that cost a fortune to make, received many negative reviews, and yet became a significant moneymaker and a cult classic. The film was a labor of love, a sprawling, overstuffed tribute to the music and the city of Chicago, featuring car chases, musical numbers, and cameos from virtually every living blues legend. It was a testament to the sheer force of Belushi and Aykroyd's creative partnership, a partnership that seemed capable of conquering any challenge, no matter how daunting. The tragedy at Chateau Marmont and the immediate aftermath. On March 5, 1982, the world received news that would shock the entertainment industry to its core. John Belushi was found dead in bungalow number 3 at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles. He was just 33 years old. The official cause of death was acute cocaine and heroin intoxication, a lethal combination known as a speedball, a cocktail that had claimed the lives of countless musicians and artists before him. The news spread like wildfire, a tragic coda to a life that had burned so brightly and so briefly. The circumstances surrounding his death were tragic and sordid. Belushi had spent his final week bouncing around the Sunset Strip party scene, a desperate attempt to recapture the adrenaline of his heyday. He was struggling to revive his movie career after a string of tepidly received films, including Continental Divide and Neighbors, which had failed to capture the magic of his SNL years. On the night of his death, friends Robin Williams and Robert De Niro had been with him at the hotel during an all-night binge that began at the Roxy on the Sunset Strip. Both had left earlier, unaware that their friend was about to embark on his final fatal journey. A woman named Kathy Smith, described variously as a groupie and a drug dealer, later admitted to injecting Belushi with the fatal dose. She would eventually serve 15 months in prison, but her sentence seemed a paltry punishment for a crime that had taken one of the brightest stars of a generation. Dan Aykroyd learned of his friend's death while working on what would become Ghostbusters. He was at the office, typing a line for Belushi's character, when the phone rang. The caller delivered the devastating news, and Aykroyd's world tilted on its axis. His immediate concern was not for himself, but for Belushi's wife, Judith. "I was concerned with getting to Judy before the media, and so I kind of just ran from the office over to her place," Aykroyd later recalled. He was in a state of shock, running on adrenaline, unable to fully process what had happened. The drive to Judith's home was a blur, a surreal journey through a landscape that suddenly seemed alien and hostile. When he arrived, he found her in a state of disbelief, the two of them clinging to each other as the enormity of the loss began to sink in. The funeral was a heartbreaking affair, a gathering of comedians who, for once, had no jokes to give. Aykroyd arrived on a motorcycle, wearing his Blues Brothers jacket, saying he wanted to give his partner one final ride. It was a gesture that was both deeply personal and profoundly symbolic, a final tribute to the brother he had lost. The church was filled with mourners, including many of Belushi's SNL castmates, his family, and his friends from the music world. The service was a mixture of grief and celebration, a reflection on a life that had been lived at full throttle. But beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of guilt, a sense among many of Belushi's friends that they could have done more, could have intervened earlier, could have saved him from his demons. Aykroyd's grief did not fully hit him until later, after the funeral had ended and the mourners had gone home. "It wasn't really until after the funeral that I went up to the house in Martha's Vineyard that he compelled me to buy," he shared in an interview. "I had a moment there, and it started to snow, and the irony of that, because he died by the powders. That's when my knees gave out." The weight of his loss finally crashed down upon him in that quiet, snow-covered moment on the island where they had shared so many happy times. He was alone, surrounded by the silence of the winter landscape, and the grief overwhelmed him. He collapsed, weeping, his body finally surrendering to the pain that his mind had tried so hard to suppress. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a reminder that even the strongest among us are not immune to the ravages of loss. The pain of a missed phone call and the lessons of grief. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Dan Aykroyd's grief is the guilt he carries about a missed phone call, a seemingly minor lapse in judgment that has haunted him for over 4 decades. In the days before Belushi's death, the comedian had called Aykroyd and left a message on his answering machine. Aykroyd was not home at the time, and by the time he returned, the message was waiting for him, a faint echo of his friend's voice that he would never hear again. He did not call him back immediately. Belushi had been behaving in ways that concerned his friends and family, uncompliant with what his wife wanted, spiraling deeper into his addictions, pushing away the people who loved him most. Aykroyd was frustrated and, as he admits, did not really want to talk to him at that moment. He was exhausted by Belushi's self-destructive behavior, worn down by the endless cycle of promises broken and relapses suffered. So he let a day go by before responding, a decision that he would come to regret for the rest of his life. By the time he finally decided to call back, it was too late. Belushi was gone, having succumbed to the lethal combination of drugs that had claimed his life. "I missed that phone call. I heard his message and didn't call him back. And then the next day it was too late," Aykroyd confessed in a tearful interview years later. His voice cracked as he spoke, the pain still raw and immediate. "I learned that when friends reach out to you, you better get back to them quick, because I let a day go by before responding, and that day may have cost him his life. It is a lesson born of profound regret, a wound that has never fully healed. Aykroyd lives with that guilt all the time, a constant companion that serves as both a reminder and a warning. And yet Aykroyd does not blame Belushi for what happened. He does not judge his friend's addictions or hold him responsible for his own demise. In interviews, he has spoken about how he and Judith Belushi learned to use Belushi's cocaine habits to try to keep him balanced and productive. Aykroyd was hands-on, monitoring Belushi's behavior minute by minute, trying to meter the control, hiding a packet now and again, making sure there were days when it was not done. He understood that Belushi was not simply a hedonist chasing a high. He was a deeply troubled man using drugs to cope with the immense pressures of fame, the unrelenting demands of his career, and the childhood trauma that had shaped him. "If I pulled too hard or resisted, he would head up into the trees. He'd be gone," Aykroyd said, describing the delicate balance he had to maintain. It was an impossible balancing act, and ultimately one that no amount of love or vigilance could sustain. Finding a way forward. Through work and corporate compassion. In the immediate aftermath of Belushi's death, Dan Aykroyd could have retreated from the world, consumed by grief and guilt. Instead, he threw himself into his work with a ferocious intensity, a conscious effort to keep his mind occupied and his heart protected. "I was at a period where I really didn't want to talk to him because he was being so uncompliant," Aykroyd had admitted about the time before Belushi's death. Now, with his friend gone, he had no choice but to move forward, and work became his salvation. He poured himself into his projects, seeking refuge in the creative process that had always been his sanctuary. A script was offered to him for a film called Dr. Detroit, a raucous comedy about a mild-mannered professor who gets caught up in the world of pimps and prostitutes. It turned out to be one of the most important movies of his life, but not for the reasons anyone might expect. On the set of that film, Aykroyd met Donna Dixon, a beautiful and talented actress who would become his wife. They married in 1983 and remained together for 37 years, raising 3 children, Vera, Stella, and Bella. Aykroyd would later describe Dr. Detroit as the most important movie he ever made, precisely because it brought him his family. "That movie was a gift," he said. "It gave me Donna, and it gave me my children. Without that film, my life would have been completely different." The film was not a commercial success, but it kept Aykroyd in the game. As he explained, the executive who offered him the role, Sean Daniel at Universal, showed what Aykroyd called corporate compassion, at a time when such compassion was rare. He said, "This guy has got a gift, and he's hurting, and he needs this job. We're going to give it to him." Daniel put his own career on the line to back Aykroyd in that film, a gesture of kindness that Aykroyd has never forgotten. That was an example of actually corporate compassion, if you will, Aykroyd reflected. The executive said, "This guy, he's got a gift, and he's hurting, and he needs this. We're going to give him this job." And he put his career on the line to back me in that film. It was a testament to the power of empathy, a reminder that even in the cutthroat world of Hollywood, there are people willing to extend a helping hand. From there, Aykroyd embarked on what would become the most successful period of his career. Ghostbusters came next, a film he had written with Belushi in mind. It was supposed to be a follow-up to The Blues Brothers, with Belushi playing Peter Venkman, the wisecracking, womanizing ghost hunter. After Belushi's death, Aykroyd found a way to keep his friend in the film nonetheless. The green, gluttonous ghost named Slimer was designed as a tribute to Belushi, a spectral embodiment of his manic energy and insatiable appetite. Aykroyd would refer to Slimer as the ghost of John Belushi, a small but meaningful way to honor his fallen partner. It was a gesture that brought him comfort, a way of keeping Belushi's spirit alive in the work they had both loved. The man he remembers and the legacy that endures. When Dan Aykroyd speaks about John Belushi today, his voice carries a mixture of love, loss, and an enduring sense of wonder at the man his friend was. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about John. I hear his laugh all the time," Aykroyd has said, his eyes often glistening with unshed tears. The laughter, he explains, was the most defining feature of Belushi's personality. A booming, infectious roar that could fill a room and lift the spirits of everyone in it. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated joy, a reminder of the happiness they had shared. What does he remember? Not the tabloid headlines about drugs and excess, not the wild stories of partying and chaos. What Aykroyd remembers is the man behind the public persona, the literate and warm human being who was so much more than his addictions. What if you have to inform people about who he was privately? He was well-read, he was warm, he was funny, he was magnetic. He was a true 1,000-watt aviation lamp walking around, Aykroyd said in one interview. He described Belushi as a man who was surrounded by very influential and intelligent friends, a man who counted among his confidants some of the most brilliant minds of his generation. He was one of those magnetic individuals that you just wanted to be around, on the scale of an Elvis or a Hendrix. A super megawattage personality, very funny and warm and compassionate and kind and smart in business. A great human being. He really was, Aykroyd concluded. Aykroyd has also speculated about what Belushi might have become had he lived. It is a bittersweet exercise, a glimpse into a future that never came to pass. I often think today that if he was alive, he would be probably a director on Broadway, directing plays and working with the greatest people in theater. I think that's where he would have been headed, Aykroyd said. It is a poignant vision of a Belushi who had outgrown his wilder impulses and channeled his immense talents into a more mature and controlled form of expression. He imagined Belushi bringing his unique energy to the stage, directing productions that would have been both commercially successful and artistically groundbreaking. It is a vision that speaks to Aykroyd's enduring belief in his friend's potential, a belief that remains undimmed by the tragedy of his death. When asked what he would say to Belushi if they met again in the afterlife, Aykroyd responded with characteristic wit. "What are you driving, man?" He expected Belushi's answer to be a Volvo. It is the kind of joke that only true friends can share. A moment of levity in the midst of profound loss. A reminder that even in grief, the bond between them endures. The humor is a coping mechanism, a way of processing the pain that never fully goes away. It is also a tribute to Belushi's own sense of humor, a celebration of the joy they had shared. Thanks so much for watching. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's most unforgettable friendships.